I had just taken my first sip of coffee when my phone buzzed with that kind of urgency that makes your stomach twist. It was my manager, something about a client emergency and needing someone on a plane within hours. And of course, I said yes. That's what I do. I fix things. I show up. I carry the weight so no one else has to. I tossed a few work outfits into my bag, heart racing but steady, already planning my approach before even leaving the house. Mark was sprawled across the couch when I told him. He barely sat up, just blinked a few times and mumbled something about me being amazing. "Go save the world," he said, forcing a lazy grin. I leaned in, kissed his cheek. His skin was warm, but something about the way he looked at me felt distant. I almost asked if everything was okay, but I didn't. I figured he was tired. We'd been distant lately, sure, but I thought it was just life getting in the way. So I grabbed my bag and left. The airport was loud and buzzing, but weirdly, it brought me a bit of peace. I found a seat near the gate, opened my laptop, and tried to shift into work mode. That's when my phone lit up again. It was Mrs. Halverson, our elderly neighbor who always waved when I pulled into the driveway. "Hi, dear. Could you please ask your husband to turn the music down? The party is getting a bit out of hand." My stomach dropped. My first thought was, what party? And then just like that, something in me clicked. I didn't think. I didn't wait. I booked a car back home. The car ride home felt endless. Every red light stretched like a cruel joke. Every slow driver ahead of us felt personal. My mind wouldn't shut off. I kept thinking maybe it was nothing, maybe a misunderstanding, a neighbor mixing up addresses, or a surprise he hadn't mentioned. But that sinking feeling in my gut? It wasn't new. It had been whispering to me for months. The way he'd been pulling away, the distracted looks, the way he laughed more with strangers on his phone than with me over dinner. I stared out the window, barely blinking, my heart thudding like it knew what I didn't want to admit. I'd spent years building something steady with him, something real, something safe. I held us together when work got hard, when the spark faded, when life turned us into distant roommates. I believed love was showing up even when things weren't easy. But now, that belief felt like a thread unraveling, and I couldn't stop pulling at it, even as I wished with everything in me that I was wrong. The driver asked if I was okay when I clenched the seatbelt so tightly my knuckles went white. I just nodded. What was I supposed to say? I think my husband threw a party the second I left for the airport. It sounded ridiculous. It felt surreal. I hadn't even been gone 2 hours. But my hands were shaking. Something was happening. Something I wasn't meant to see. And yet, something told me I needed to see it. I needed to catch it before it vanished behind lies and empty apologies. As we turned onto my street, I could already hear it, the bass thudding through the pavement, laughter spilling out into the night air like it belonged to someone else's life. There were cars everywhere, parked along the curb, half on lawns, headlights still warm. My heart was racing, but my face stayed still. I don't know how I kept my composure. Maybe part of me had already broken on the ride home. Or maybe I'd trained myself too well to stay calm when the ground beneath me was crumbling. The porch light was on. That same warm glow I used to associate with comfort. Now it just felt like a spotlight, waiting to expose whatever was on the other side of the door. I didn't even knock. I had keys. It was my house. At least I thought it was. The moment I stepped inside, it was like I'd walked into a different universe. Loud music, perfume in the air, people I'd never seen lounging on my furniture, laughing like they belonged there, like I didn't. I stood there, invisible in my own home. No one noticed me. Not at first. I could have screamed, but I didn't. I just watched. And with every second, the quiet inside me grew louder. I hadn't even made it past the hallway, but I already knew. Something had shifted. Permanently. and I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do. But I knew one thing with chilling certainty. I hadn't come home early just to disappear. I stepped further inside, and the sound hit me like a wave. Laughter, clinking glasses, loud music echoing off the walls I once painted myself. Every inch of the house felt foreign, like someone had stolen the skeleton of my life and dressed it up in chaos. There were women everywhere. Tight dresses, high heels, red lipstick smudged across cocktail glasses. Strangers, giggling in corners, snapping selfies against the backdrop of my living room, the same one where I once hung Christmas stockings. No one turned to look at me. I wasn't even a blip on their radar. One woman brushed past me on her way to the kitchen, not even offering a glance. I saw open bottles of wine on the counter, sticky liquor spills on the floor, and the vase Mark gave me for our 5th anniversary now filled with plastic straws. I stood in the center of it all, completely still. It was like walking into someone else's life, except it was mine. And he had opened the door wide, letting the world walk all over it. I moved slowly, trying to make sense of it. Not screaming, not crying, just watching, observing, collecting. My heels clicked against the tile like a metronome to the numbness setting in. And still, not a single person seemed to care that I was there. I passed by my own wedding photo, shoved face down on a side table, like even the house itself was trying to forget I ever existed in it. But I remembered. Every wall, every memory. And still, I kept walking. I followed the sound of louder music toward the backyard, and that's when I saw him. Mark, shirtless, grinning, holding a drink like he hadn't a care in the world. He was seated like a king, sprawled in one of the patio chairs, surrounded by 3 women who looked like they belonged on the cover of a cheap magazine. One had her hand on his shoulder. Another was feeding him something off a toothpick. The third? She was on his lap, her head tilted back in laughter, like they shared some secret joke. Time didn't stop. It didn't even slow. But everything inside me did. I didn't yell. I didn't gasp. I just stood there, watching the man I married laugh like a teenager on spring break, completely at home in the wreckage he created. And in that moment, I felt something shift. Not a crack, not a break, a clean snap, like a cord being cut. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was something colder, something quieter, something far more dangerous. Eventually, he saw me. Our eyes locked, and that smirk on his face drained into confusion, then panic. He froze, mid-sip. The woman in his lap turned to see what he was staring at. But I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I let him sit there, unraveling under the weight of my silence. I turned around, walked past the mess, past the strangers, past the music, and stepped out of the house like it never belonged to me at all. I didn't rush to the car. I didn't break down. I walked. Slow, deliberate, one foot in front of the other. My heels sank slightly into the grass as I moved past the line of cars cluttering the curb. I didn't even look back. Not once. Because I knew if I did, I might lose that strange, steady calm holding me together. And I needed that calm more than I needed answers, more than I needed apologies. I wasn't ready to scream. I was ready to think. Inside the car, I sat in silence for a long time. The engine was off, windows slightly cracked. I could still hear the thump of the music, feel the bass in my chest like it was mocking me. But in that stillness, I made a quiet promise to myself. He wouldn't get a second chance to explain this away. Not with a stuttered excuse, not with drunken nonsense, not with flowers and fake tears. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. And now, I had one to make too. I didn't drive off right away. I just let the reality settle over me like a second skin. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. It was real. And it had unfolded right in front of my eyes. And while he was still inside playing the part of some bachelor, I was already writing the next scene. One where I didn't fall apart. One where I didn't beg. One where I took back the pen and rewrote the ending myself. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw things or call my best friend in the middle of the night. Instead, I went quiet. That dangerous kind of quiet that comes when a woman has seen enough. The kind of quiet that listens, plans, calculates. The next morning, while he was probably nursing a hangover and pretending nothing had happened, I was already sitting in a lawyer's office. I told her everything, every detail, and she didn't flinch, just nodded, handed me a pen, and got to work. When I got home, I didn't confront him. He wasn't even there. That helped. I went straight to the security system he had forgotten even existed. The tiny cameras we installed years ago after a neighbor's car got broken into. He'd barely touched the app since, but I had. I downloaded the footage from the night of the party. Every frame, every sound, the women, the drinking, the way he laughed about me being too busy playing boss. It was all there, waiting for me like cold evidence on a silver platter. I didn't even feel angry watching it. Not anymore. What I felt was clarity, for the first time in years maybe. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to plead. I was going to be methodical. Not for revenge, not yet, but for self-respect. I froze the joint accounts. All of them. He never noticed I was the one depositing most of the money anyway. I called the bank, updated my passwords, reset everything he could ever try to weasel his way back into. I was done playing supportive. By the third day, I changed the locks. He was still gone, probably staying with a friend, or more likely with one of those women who thought his cheap charm was something rare. I didn't care where he was. I only cared that when he returned, he'd know without a word that the door he used to walk through without question no longer recognized him. I watched from the upstairs window as the locksmith worked, the metal clicking into place like punctuation on the sentence I'd waited years to write. Then I packed his things. Not carefully, not cruelly, just deliberately. Every shirt he left draped over the armchair, every cologne bottle he used before a night out, with the guys. Trash bags, not boxes, not luggage. Because when someone treats your life like it's disposable, you learn to stop wrapping their mess in niceties. I left them out front, right by the walkway, and then I taped the envelope to the door. Inside, a legal notice, divorce papers, and a copy of the footage. Neatly labeled, no explanation needed. It started raining shortly after. I don't know why that part sticks with me, but it does. I watched the trash bags get wet from the window, the fabric inside soaking through, colors darkening. But I didn't feel bad. Not for a second. I actually felt light. Like I'd just peeled off a heavy coat I didn't know I'd been wearing. And maybe part of me hoped he'd show up right then, soaked and scrambling. But he didn't. And that silence? That was the first real peace I'd had in years. He showed up the next evening, just as the sun was dipping below the trees, casting long shadows across the lawn, and across the bags that still sat untouched, right where I left them. I watched him from the kitchen, lights off, heart steady. He stood there for a moment, like he wasn't sure if he was at the right house. He tried the doorknob. It didn't budge. He knocked, softly at first, then louder. But I didn't move. Let him knock. Let him feel the distance he created with every careless choice. Then he noticed the envelope. I saw his face change, from confusion to disbelief to that wounded look men wear when they realize they're no longer in control of the narrative. He opened it right there on the porch. I imagined him reading every line, watching every second of the footage, feeling his little empire crack beneath him. He looked around, like he expected me to appear. Maybe to fight. Maybe to forgive. But I didn't give him either. I stayed behind the curtain, quiet, still, powerful. For years, I carried our life like a fragile vase, always careful not to drop it. He danced through it with muddy shoes. And now? Now he stood alone on the front step of a house that didn't belong to him anymore. And I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel pity. I felt ready. Because this wasn't the end. This was just the start of what I had planned next. I didn't scream on the porch, and I didn't text him afterward. Instead, I started with something quieter, something cleaner. I found the guest list. Not that it was official, of course, but thanks to social media and the security footage, it wasn't hard to identify the faces. I gathered names, matched them to profiles, found addresses. Some women were tagged in photos. Others had posted stories from my living room, drunk and glittery, dancing beside my wedding portrait. They didn't even blur my name in the background. I created packages, anonymous, brown envelopes, no return address. Inside each, screenshots, short video clips, carefully chosen stills from that night. And a note, not cruel, just honest. You were at this party. Did you know he was married? Most of them didn't. I wasn't surprised. Mark always had a way of making himself seem like a victim, the hard-working husband with the cold, absent wife. She's married to her job, I heard him say in one of the clips. Forgot how to be a wife a long time ago. That line became my favorite, because one of the women, the one in the red dress with the fake laugh, clearly hadn't known. And she was the one who posted the footage, not anonymously, not quietly. She blasted it online with a caption that read, "When you find out the guy you were flirting with all night has a wife, and she's a badass." It spread fast, faster than I expected. And I never said a word. I let it move on its own, like wildfire. At first, he tried to control the damage, took the video down from his own page, reported the posts, claimed it was taken out of context, but it was too late. People had already shared it, saved it, dissected it. It was in private group chats, work threads, even some meme pages. His voice, slurring that awful sentence, "She forgot how to be a wife," was now soundtrack to his downfall. And I didn't need to lift a finger. I just watched, quietly, while his carefully polished image unraveled. The fallout came swiftly. His boss called him in for a conversation. The company had a strict code of conduct, and even though the party was technically off the clock, the optics were bad, especially with the comments flooding in. Women calling him manipulative, men calling him careless. A few called him the guy from the video, like he was a punchline. I heard through a mutual friend that his promotion was quietly rescinded. No big announcement, just a quiet door closing behind him. As for his social circle, they scattered like roaches under kitchen lights. The ones who used to toast beers with him on weekends suddenly had plans. The men who cheered him on now avoided eye contact. And the women, well, they remembered the footage. They remembered the smirk, the lap, the arrogance. No one likes to realize they were just another prop in someone else's fantasy. And me? I stayed silent. I never gloated, never clapped back. I let the silence speak for me. People started whispering my name, not in pity, but with a kind of reverence. At my job, colleagues looked at me differently. Not like a victim, but like a woman who had drawn a line and dared someone to cross it. A few even pulled me aside, quietly admitting they had gone through something similar but never knew how to take their power back. That's the thing. When a woman doesn't scream, when she doesn't crumble, people don't know what to do with her strength. So they call it cold. I called it peace. I never replied to the DMs he sent once the backlash started. I saw the panic in them, the rapid shift from defensive to desperate. "You're really going to ruin me over one stupid night?" he wrote once. And I laughed. Ruin him? No, He did that all by himself. I just handed him the mirror, and in the reflection, there wasn't a man. There was a boy who thought charm was currency and that silence meant submission. He had no idea that silence could roar louder than rage. And I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation. All I needed was that moment. Quiet, late at night, standing by my window, watching the world move on while his fell apart. That was enough. But even then, I knew I wasn't finished. There was still one chapter left to write. Not for him, not for revenge, but for me. For the version of myself I had nearly lost in loving the wrong person for too long. My new apartment wasn't big. It didn't need to be. It had white walls, high windows, and a quiet that wasn't heavy. It was healing. I filled it slowly, intentionally. A worn leather chair I found at a vintage shop. A small bookshelf with only the books I loved, not the ones I used to buy for display. A bottle of wine always chilled, just in case I wanted to toast to absolutely nothing. It wasn't about starting over. It was about starting true, with no audience, no performance, just me. I began to remember myself in pieces, in the silence of Sunday mornings, in the way I made my coffee, strong and black, just how I like it, no one else to adjust for. In the music I played while folding laundry, dancing barefoot in the kitchen without worrying if I looked silly. There was no grand epiphany, no dramatic moment of triumph, just small, ordinary moments that slowly whispered, "You're home now." And for the first time in years, I believed them. I started reconnecting with friends I had slowly drifted from, not because of fights, but because I had spent so long managing his moods, his chaos, his storms. I laughed more, I slept better. And I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, because the person who kept kicking it off was no longer part of my story. Healing didn't come in waves. It came in layers. Soft, steady, mine. And I didn't miss him. Not once. What I missed was the woman I used to be. And now, she was back. Then one evening, just as the city lights began to flicker on and the hum of the world slowed to a hush, my phone lit up. A number I hadn't blocked, not out of hesitation, but out of apathy. I didn't need to cut him off completely. He was already gone. The message was short. I was drunk. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a while, not because I was tempted, but because it was almost laughable how little had changed for him. No accountability, no real apology. Just a desperate, sloppy reach for the version of me who would have said, "Okay, let's talk." But that woman no longer lived here. She packed her bags the same night I did. So I blocked the number, not out of anger, not even out of satisfaction, just necessity. Like deleting a song you once loved, but now can't stand to hear. I wasn't angry. I was simply uninterested. His voice had become background noise I no longer had to tolerate. And that, more than anything, was the victory. Not the trash bags, not the legal papers, not the viral video. It was this: being unmoved, free. Calm in a way that no one could shake. The kind of calm that comes not from winning a battle, but from walking away from a war you never wanted in the first place. The kind of calm you sip like wine at the end of a long day. Grateful, not because it's perfect, but because it's finally yours. That night I opened a bottle of wine, the good one, the one I'd been saving without even knowing what for. I curled up by the window, glass in hand, city below me, soft music playing in the background. No tears, no heavy reflections, just a moment of stillness. And then I raised my glass, not to him, not to revenge, but to the decision that changed everything, coming home early. That one twist of fate, that single instinct to turn back. It didn't just end a party, it saved my life. I thought about how many times I'd ignored my gut, How often I'd smoothed over cracks with hope and silence. But not anymore. Now I listen. To the warning signs, to the quiet voice inside me, to the feeling that tells you something's not right. And I honor it. That's what this was really about. Not punishing him, not proving anything, but choosing myself, fully, finally, unapologetically. So, if you ask me if I regret it, the answer is no. I don't regret coming home early. I don't regret what I saw. I don't regret walking away without a word. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is show up at the exact moment she wasn't expected, and instead of falling apart, she begins again, stronger than ever.
My name is Robin Smith. I'm 27 years old, and for most of my life, I thought being dependable was the best thing a woman could offer. I paid my bills on time, kept a steady job in project coordination, never missed birthdays or anniversaries. I was the one people called when they needed a ride to the airport at 5 a.m. or someone to feed their cat while they went on vacation. Reliable, predictable, steady. For a long time, I thought Joseph appreciated that. We had been together almost 2 years, and from the outside, we probably looked solid. He was charismatic, the kind of man who could walk into a room and draw eyes without even trying. I was quieter, the one who liked to observe to smooth edges when conversations went rough. I believed we balanced each other. I gave more than I realized. When Joseph's hours were cut, I covered rent without complaint. When his car broke down, I picked him up for work every morning, even though it meant leaving my own job early. I learned to cook the meals he loved, listened to his endless venting about clients, even canceled a long-planned girls' trip because he didn't want to spend the weekend alone. Looking back now, the math is obvious. Love had become a ledger, and I was the only one adding to it. But at the time, I told myself this was what love meant, giving even when it was inconvenient, proving devotion in small sacrifices. Then there were the jokes, the ones that never landed. When we met his college buddies, he'd introduce me with a grin. "This is Robin, my safety net." They laughed. I laughed too, even though it lodged like a stone in my chest. Later, when I asked what he meant, he smirked. "You know, safe, dependable. You're the one a man can count on when the fun ones get boring." He brushed off my silence with a quick, "Don't be sensitive, babe." I wanted to believe actions mattered more than words. He came home to me every night. He said he loved me. That had to count for something. One night, as we sat on the couch watching Netflix, he dropped a sentence like it was nothing. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like if I dated women who were a little more exciting." I paused the show. "What do you mean by exciting?" He shrugged, eyes on the screen. "You know, spontaneous. Women who don't just work, cook, and go to the gym. Women who live a little." The words stung, but I forced a laugh. "Well, someone has to make sure the bills get paid." He smirked without looking at me. "Exactly." That should have been the moment I realized where this was headed. Instead, I redoubled my efforts, thinking love was about proving myself. More surprises, more patience, more giving. Until the night of the party. It was one of Joseph's friends' birthdays, hosted at a downtown club. I hated crowded bars, the shouting, the overpriced drinks, the shallow small talk. But he wanted to go, so I ironed a dress shirt, fixed my hair, and went with him. The moment we walked in, he lit up like a star. He was in his element, throwing back shots, laughing too loud, hugging everyone as if he owned the room. I hung back, ordered drinks, smiled politely. That's when I saw her. Younger, maybe mid-20s, with long hair and a flirty laugh. Joseph zeroed in on her like a moth to flame. At first, I told myself he was just being friendly, but as the night stretched on, his friendly looked more like outright flirting. He leaned close when he spoke. She touched his arm, and he didn't move it away. At one point, he whispered something in her ear, and she giggled like it was the funniest thing in the world. Heat crawled up my neck, but I stayed quiet. I wasn't the jealous type. I believed trust meant giving space. Still watching my boyfriend entertain another woman while I stood in the shadows felt like a slap. When he finally wandered back to me, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, I asked lightly, "Having fun?" He grinned. "Yeah, she's hilarious. You should talk to her. You'd like her." I bit my tongue and said nothing, but the silence followed us into the car on the drive home. Joseph scrolled his phone, humming, acting like nothing was wrong. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Finally, I said, "Do you think it's okay to flirt with someone all night while your girlfriend is standing right there?" His head snapped up. "Flirt seriously. I was just talking." Talking doesn't usually involve touching someone's arm every 5 seconds. He rolled his eyes. You're being dramatic. It was innocent. It didn't look innocent. He sighed, the sound dripping with condescension. Robin, you're reading too much into this. Not everything has to be a big deal. My jaw clenched. I just don't like feeling invisible. And then, he smirked. That cruel, careless smirk. Invisible. Please. You're fine. Look, you're the kind of woman men settle for when they've run out of options. You're dependable. You're safe, but you're not exciting. Women like her, they're exciting. The words punched the air out of me. Settle for. He shrugged as if it was nothing. I'm just being honest. Your wife material one day, sure, but I'm not ready to settle down. I don't want to waste my best years playing house with someone predictable. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a joke, but he didn't. He just scrolled on his phone like he'd explained something reasonable. 1,000 emotions surged through me: anger, humiliation, the urge to scream, to demand he take it back. But instead, something inside me went quiet. A switch flipped. If that's how you see me, I said softly, eyes on the road, then I won't waste your time. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means you don't have to settle. Not with me. He opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance. I drove the rest of the way in silence, parked, and went straight to the couch with a blanket. He didn't follow. That was the night everything changed. The night I realized the man I'd given everything to saw me as nothing more than a placeholder until something better came along. And in that moment, I decided I would never play that role again. The morning after that party, sunlight streamed through the blinds like nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had shifted. Joseph padded into the kitchen wearing one of my old t-shirts, yawning phone already in his hand. He poured himself coffee, kissed the top of my head like the night before had never happened, and asked casually, "Want eggs?" I stared at him from the couch, my body aching from barely sleeping. The words from the car still echoed like a bruise that refused to fade. The kind of woman men settle for. No thanks, I murmured. He shrugged, unfazed, and cracked eggs into a pan, whistling. No apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. As though tearing me down was just part of normal conversation. Something hardened in me right then. I realized I'd been living for scraps, waiting for him to wake up one day and recognize my worth. But he didn't care. He didn't see loyalty as strength. To him, it was boredom, predictability. So I made a decision. I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't argue, I wouldn't demand he change his mind. Instead, I started pulling back, quietly. At first, it was small things. I stopped cooking dinner after work. I'm not really hungry, I'd say, and let him fend for himself. I stopped texting him throughout the day, stopped asking how meetings went, or reminding him about deadlines. When he asked why I wasn't joining him for drinks with his friends, I smiled and said, I'm tired tonight. Instead of staying up until midnight waiting for him to come home, I went to bed early. The distance grew invisible at first, but undeniable. I began collecting pieces of myself. A sweater here, a stack of books there moved quietly into boxes and then into the trunk of my car. I brought them over to my friend Maya's apartment, where she raised her brows but didn't ask questions. Just opened the door and let me place them in her spare room. You sure about this? She asked one evening, watching me unload another box. I nodded, my voice calm. I'm done trying to prove myself. Still, the ache didn't vanish overnight. In the evenings, when Joseph stayed out late, I'd sit on the couch, staring at the empty space beside me, remembering the girl who thought love meant sacrifice. I mourned her more than I mourned him. He didn't even notice the shift. Or maybe he noticed, but didn't care. He was too busy basking in the glow of attention from others. His phone buzzed constantly, names I didn't recognize lighting up the screen. When I asked who it was, he'd wave it off. Friends. You wouldn't know them. One night, he stumbled in after midnight, smelling of cologne that wasn't his. My chest tightened, but I said nothing. I had no energy left for confrontation. Silence was my rebellion. What he didn't know was that every act of indifference from me was deliberate. Every missing book, every cleared drawer, every skipped dinner was one more piece of myself I was reclaiming. I used to think walking away would require screaming tears, dramatic exits. But in reality, it was quieter, a slow unraveling. It was in the way I stopped answering his jokes with laughter, the way I stopped dressing up for his events, the way I let him drift further into his late nights without asking where he'd been. The truth was, I didn't need to expose him. He was exposing himself every day, and I was preparing for the moment I'd finally be gone. The night I finally left was quieter than I imagined freedom would sound. Joseph had gone out again. Some work happy hour that always seemed to turn into a half-forgotten bar crawl. I didn't ask where. I didn't ask when he'd be back. I already knew he wouldn't notice the difference. I stood in the apartment we had shared for nearly 2 years, looking around at the spaces where pieces of me used to live. The bookshelf I'd once filled was half empty now. The kitchen counter, once stacked with meal prep containers I made for us, was bare except for a few scattered takeout boxes. My favorite blanket was folded neatly on the couch, the same couch where I'd spent countless nights waiting for him, hoping he'd choose me over the party. Not anymore. I gathered the last of my things into a duffel bag, my laptop, a few toiletries, the blanket I'd been sleeping under. As I zipped it shut, my hands didn't tremble. They were steady, certain, like I'd been rehearsing this moment for weeks. There was no note, no text, no grand announcement, just silence. I closed the door softly behind me and walked down the hall, each step echoing like a countdown ending. At Maya's place, she was waiting, leaning against the doorframe. "So, this is it?" she asked as I stepped inside with the duffel. "This is it," I said simply. We sat on her couch drinking tea. For the first time in months, I felt air filling my lungs fully. No weight pressing on my chest, no second guessing, just a vast, terrifying relief. The first nights alone weren't easy. The bed felt too wide. The silence felt heavier than I'd expected. My phone buzzed with Joseph's messages, short, careless ones. "Where are you?" "You coming home? We need milk." I ignored them all. Eventually the tone shifted, a clipped annoyed. "If you're mad, fine, but don't make this a big deal." I laughed bitterly when I read it, as if all the cracks, all the humiliations, all the betrayals were nothing more than me making things a big deal. Instead of replying, I turned off notifications. While Joseph partied, I rebuilt. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected. I signed up for a painting class I'd always put off because Joseph didn't like messy hobbies. I stayed late at work, not because I had to, but because I wanted to prove to myself I could thrive without his shadow over me. Meanwhile, Joseph made sure the world saw him thriving, or at least pretending to. His Instagram filled with photos of him and a new woman. Blonde, bold, half-drunk smiles captured in blurry selfies at rooftop bars. Captions like, "Finally living my best life," and "Some people just don't get me, but she does." Mutual friends sent me screenshots, pity, mixed with judgment in their texts. "Are you okay? Have you seen this?" I told them the truth, I'm fine, and I was. Because while he was broadcasting his supposed upgrade, I was quietly upgrading myself. I didn't need to announce it. I didn't need to prove it. My healing was private, steady, and real. But deep down, I knew something his selfies couldn't hide joy, like that doesn't last when it's built on shallow ground. Joseph thought he'd left me behind, replaced me with someone more exciting. What he didn't realize was that I had already left him long before he posted that first picture. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. At first, Joseph's post painted the picture of a man who had traded up. Rooftop selfies, weekend trips, his arm slung around her waist like she was a trophy he wanted the world to see. People whispered that he looked happier than ever. But whispers have a way of turning. 2 months and a friend of mine mentioned over coffee. "You know his new girl." She's already complaining. He flakes on her constantly. Shows up late, cancels plans last minute. I sipped my drink, keeping my face neutral. Inside, though, a flicker of something shifted. Not satisfaction, not gloating, just clarity. Joseph wasn't someone who had outgrown me. He was someone who would keep repeating the same cycle no matter who he was with. And sure enough, the stories spread. He was seen at bars with other women. He ignored her texts. He'd vanish for days, only to pop back up with excuses. The same charm that once made me forgive him now left her furious. I didn't need to intervene. Karma was doing all the work. Meanwhile, my own life had quietly bloomed. At work, my boss noticed my late nights and offered me a chance to lead a new project, something I'd always dreamed of, but never pushed for while I was busy managing Joseph's chaos. I took it. I picked up running again, pounding the pavement each morning, feeling my body grow stronger, lighter. I started sleeping through the night without waiting for the sound of keys in the lock. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for someone else's storm. The shift was obvious enough that friends began commenting. "You look different, Robin. Lighter." I just smiled, because it was true. I wasn't carrying him anymore. Then came the barbecue. It was a mutual friend's summer gathering, burgers on the grill, kids splashing in a pool, laughter humming through the backyard. I almost didn't go, worried he'd be there, but something inside me whispered, "You're not the one who should be hiding." And there he was. Joseph stood, a smith the yard alone, drink in hand. The woman from his Instagram nowhere in sight. His smile strained his eyes, darting as he noticed me. I felt the old nerves flare for a moment, the urge to shrink, to slip away before he saw me. But then Maya nudged my shoulder. You okay? I nodded, exhaling. Better than okay. So I stayed. I laughed with friends, helped flip burgers, played tag with someone's kids until we were all out of breath, and every so often I caught him staring. The man who once called me invisible was watching me like he'd never seen me before. But I didn't look back. That night, as I drove home with the windows down and the smell of smoke still in my hair, I realized something simple. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need an apology. His downfall wasn't my victory to claim. Because Joseph wasn't my problem anymore. He was his own karma. The first sign of his collapse came through a coworker. She leaned to Smith my desk one morning, a conspiratorial grin tugging at her lips. Did you hear about Joseph? She asked. I froze for half a second, then forced my voice even. No. What about him? Her eyes sparkled. That girl he's been parading around, gone. Apparently he ghosted her for someone else, and then she found out he'd been cheating the whole time. Drama. I nodded politely, though inside I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity. Just confirmation of what I'd known all along. He didn't want partners. He wanted props. Soon after, his Instagram went silent. No more rooftop selfies, no declarations of living my best life. The loud joy faded into an eerie digital quiet. And that's when the messages started. The first was casual, "Hey stranger, how have you been?" I stared at the screen, then locked my phone. 2 days later, I missed talking to you. Can we grab coffee sometime? Silence from me. Then the calls. 3 in 1 week. I ignored the first 2. On the third, I answered, curiosity prickling at the edges of my calm. Robin, he breathed, as though saying my name alone should soften me. Look, I know I said some things I shouldn't have. I was scared. I felt trapped, like I was settling down too soon. I panicked. But I see now, you were the only one who really cared. Can we talk? For a moment, I almost laughed at the irony. The man who told me I was the woman men only settle for was now trying to convince me I was the one worth chasing. There's nothing to talk about, I said evenly. Come on, he pressed, his voice dipping into that practiced charm. Don't be like that. Everyone makes mistakes. You always believed in me. You were the only one who actually saw me. Saw him. The words cut deeper than he realized. I had seen him. That was the problem. You made yourself clear, Joseph, I replied, my voice flat. Silence buzzed through the line. Then, sharp and defensive, he snapped. So that's it. You're just going to throw away 2 years, like they meant nothing. I'm not the one who threw them away, I said simply, then ended the call. From there, the desperation grew. He sent flowers to my office, cheap roses with a note that read, "Miss you." I handed them to the receptionist without opening the card. He cornered a mutual friend to act as his messenger. Joseph says he regrets everything. He wants a second chance. I shook my head, not interested. The friend frowned. Robin, he's really hurting. Couldn't you at least hear him out? Yes, I said calmly. But I won't. And the strangest part, I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I was detached, like watching someone act out a play I'd already seen. His regret didn't move me because it wasn't about love, it was about losing control. The man who once called me predictable was now the one spiraling unpredictable in his grasping. And for the first time, I felt a clarity so sharp it was almost freeing. I hadn't lost him. He had lost me. It was a Friday night when the knock came. 3 slow raps against the wood, heavy enough to rattle the frame. I already knew who it was before I even looked. When I opened the door, there stood Joseph. He was nothing like the man who had once strutted through crowded bars, smug with a drink in hand and a woman on his arm. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair a mess, and his eyes bloodshot. Desperate told me he hadn't slept in days. Robin, he said softly, almost reverently, like my name was a key to unlock the past. Please, just let me in so we can talk. I didn't move from the doorway. There's nothing to talk about. His lip trembled. Don't do this. Don't act like I didn't mean anything to you. We were together for 2 years. You can't just erase me like that. I kept my voice steady. You erased yourself when you decided I wasn't enough. His face twisted frustration bleeding through his practiced vulnerability. I didn't mean it like that. I was drunk. I was stupid. You meant every word. I cut him off. That's why it came out so easily. He stepped closer, hands clasped like he was praying. I didn't know what I had until I lost it. Please, Robin. I'll prove I've changed. I'll do anything. For a flicker of a second, I saw the boyish charm that once drew me in, the charisma that had made me believe he was worth the sacrifices. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Yes. This isn't about whether you've changed, I said calmly. It's about respect. And once you told me I was just the woman men settle for, there was no coming back from that. You don't get to rewrite the story just because your gamble didn't pay off. His desperation curdled into anger. His voice rose. So that's it. You think you're too good for me now. You think some other guy's going to treat you better. No one will care about you the way I did. I almost laughed. You didn't care about me, Joseph. You cared about what I could give you. Big difference. He stared at me, breathing hard tears mixing with rage. For a moment, I thought he might lash out. Instead, he let out a bitter, broken laugh. You're going to regret this, he spat, his voice cracking. You're going to wake up one day and realize you pushed away the best thing you ever had. I met his eyes without flinching. No, Joseph. I woke up the day you told me exactly what you thought of me. That was the day I realized losing you was the best thing that could have happened. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. His face crumpled, muttered something I didn't catch, then he turned and stormed down the hall. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it for a moment. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't heavy. Instead, I felt free. For the first time since that night at the party, I felt no anger, no heartbreak, just peace. Joseph had once tried to define me as the woman men settle for. But the truth was, he had settled for shallow thrills, temporary validation, fleeting excitement. And in the end, it left him with nothing. Me. I had my dignity, my clarity, my future wide open. And that was worth more than anything he could ever offer.